the Biodiversity and Habitat Management Officer for the Causeway, Coast and Glens Borough Council, and part of my role is to survey our land for these invasive species, and I'm currently writing up a strategy and plan to get these managed in a strategic way. So these pictures on the front here are some of the plants that you're probably familiar with around the borough, and I'm going to talk about them a bit more later on in the presentation. So first of all, I'm going to go over what a non-native species is and then how they actually become invasive, because not every non-native species is invasive. I'm going to go over why they are an issue, and then I'll talk about some of the common species that we find in Northern Ireland and in our borough. I'll then go over how to report them, because that's a really important thing that everyone can do is reporting when they see an invasive species. I'll give a link for a really useful resource, and then there'll be a little call for action at the end. So, what is a non-native species? It is a plant, animal, or fungi that have been introduced through human activity outside of their natural ecological area. So basically, humans have kind of moved things around the world as we've moved around the world and introduced different things to different places where they haven't evolved. They're not always bad. Some of them actually bring things to our lives that are positive. So, for example, the crops, like all of our wheat and barley, that kind of thing, they're not necessarily native to where we are, to Ireland, including the potato, which I'm sure we all wish was native to this island because we all love them so much, but they're actually originally from South America. Pets, a lot of them are not native to this country. This is my two cats here. They're actually originally from Egypt way back when in the day, and they became domesticated. And although cats aren't an invasive species, they are detrimental to biodiversity, so they are my Achilles heel, but there are ways that you can help them not affect biodiversity as much, which is bells on collars and keeping them in at nighttime, etc. Also livestock. So chickens are originally from Southeast Asia. They would be jungle fowl that run around in the forests there. And we've eventually domesticated them and changed them to what we know today. And then timber as well. So a lot of our forestry, that's all like Sitka spruce, which is from the west coast of North America. And it grows really well in our climates. That's why it's a timber crop, because it grows fast here. So these are all useful and they've not necessarily become invasive. Some of the Sitka can become a bit invasive. You can see escapees, but it's not seen as a detrimental issue. But yeah, it's when they become invasive that they become a problem. So how do plants in particular become invasive? Well, one, they're really well suited to the new environment. So our climate is relatively mild and wet, and a lot of plants like these conditions, so they can grow really, really well in our environment. Some plants as well can be more attractive to our native animal species, which can pollinate them or spread their seed. So this picture here is Himalayan balsam, which is one of the species I'll talk about, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with it. This is really nectar rich, so I know a lot of beekeepers like it, and there's a lot of argument over whether we should be eradicating it because it is good for pollinators. However, because it's so nectar rich, it's more like a McDonald's diet for our insects, and you know, it's not as good for them as foraging out for our native species, and where you've got a big variety of a food source coming from lots of different native species, if they're only going to the one junk food, which is the Himalayan balsam. So if the native species are going more so to Himalayan balsam because of the high nectar content, they're not then pollinating our native species. So it's like a double whammy, because the balsam gets pollinated and then it spreads its seeds and it continues to take over. The native plants kind of get left behind and outcompeted by the balsam. Plants that have been introduced have also evolved in a different ecological setting. And this different setting has a lot of pests and pathogens and diseases which keep those populations of plants under control. whereas the new location has no means of controlling them because they haven't evolved side by side. So for example, like our native plants will have different insects and diseases and stuff that keep their populations under control, so they're never going to, you know, spread too much and become like a monocrop. Whereas these new plants, they haven't evolved with them, so they can take over more easily. So invasive, they become invasive when they outcompete our native species for resources such as food and water. You can see here in this picture, there's Japanese knotweed on the one side of a riverbank. There's a river in between the two banks here, and you can see on one side it's essentially all Japanese knotweed with some willow poking out the top, and then on the other side you can see there is diversity of species, and that's our native species. Different grasses, we've got bramble and alder tree growing, and the likes of cow parsley and stuff. So you can even just see from this basic picture that has taken over. There's nothing really growing underneath. You can see it's probably going to be pretty dark under there. So that's out competing all of our native species. Invasive species can introduce diseases. So I'll go with the example of squirrels because it's a lot easier to explain. So the grey squirrel carries a disease called squirrel pox, which it is immune to. However, our native red squirrels are not immune to it. So essentially, when they get it, it kills them, and then the greys can outcompete them because then because the reds are getting the squirrel pox. Now, the impact of invasive species is detrimental to the whole ecosystem. It decreases native biodiversity, it can cause erosion, it can cause flooding. So erosion often happens with a lot of these species because they have a lot of them die back during the winter. So Japanese knotweed, if this was a winter shot, they'll just be like kind of dead stalks sticking up where that plant is. So a lot of them grow along our riverbanks, and when they die back, there's nothing holding the banks together as well because the roots can die back too. So that causes the erosion. And they also cause damage, to the environment, but also to human health. So there's a plant that I will talk about in this called giant hogweed, which I'm sure some of you have heard of. That can be pretty dangerous for human and pet health. And they also cause damage to the economy. So it was estimated that it costs the UK economy £150 million a year to control invasive species. So they're a big deal. They're not a good thing to have. And also, for my part, especially with biodiversity, they are the second biggest threat to biodiversity after habitat loss. So yeah, they're pretty detrimental. And they're also known as invasive alien species. So in case you hear that term crop up in this talk or elsewhere, then that is also what they are called. So how have they got here and how have they spread into the wild? So most of the time they've been introduced by collectors and explorers. Generally in the 1800s, a lot of these things tended to come over when humans started to explore and see the rest of the world. They would see these amazing things and bring them back as gifts or exotic garden plants and that kind of thing. For example, then the grey squirrel was a wedding gift once upon a time. I think it was 6 of them as a wedding gift. And these squirrels escaped, and now we have the issues that we have today. So yeah, be careful when you go on your holidays what you bring back. So a lot of the plants are garden escape. So it's either through the way that they can disperse their seeds. They can be very good at dispersing them either through exploding seed pods or the wind or being eaten by our native birds and stuff who then disperse them elsewhere. Or they can also spread through rhizomes, which is like a rooty type structure that's under the ground, and then it sends up suckers. Like how a raspberry grows. If you have raspberries in your garden, you'll see a lot of raspberry suckers coming up. They can be released into the wild, either intentionally or unintentionally. a lot of the time, dumping of garden waste can spread them. So say you're, I don't know, doing your spring cleaning in your garden and you cut through things, and then maybe you live more rurally and you just dump it over the fence instead of taking it to the, your waste disposal area. That can spread them. And also unwanted pets. So you might come across, terrapins, that kind of thing in ponds in the wild. Terrapins are not a native species, so things can be released that way. They can also be hitchhikers. So I was chatting earlier today with my colleagues at lunchtime about Rathlin Island. They've got a project on the go at the moment. It's coming into its second year, called Life Raft Project, which is controlling rat populations and ferret populations on Rathlin Island. Now, these animals, especially the rats, would probably have hitchhiked on boats over to Rathlin Island, and that's how they managed to invade Rathlin Island. So that's just a more local example, but yeah, you get a lot of hitchhikers coming in through luggage and cargo ships, that kind of thing, on boats. That's how some things arrive. And a big one is the lack of awareness and knowledge. So a lot of the time, somebody might have this class plant that they've really liked for ages, but then they're redoing the garden. It's like, oh, sure, it won't do any damage. But in actual fact, it can do damage. So this picture here is of a plant called Chilean rhubarb, or giant rhubarb, the Latin name Gunnera tinctoria, and that is a garden plant. It's only just been made illegal. So as of 2021, you cannot buy that anymore in garden centres. It's illegal now to buy or sell that plant because it is invasive. And this one's escaped from gardens in Castle Rock. So a lot of these species are under law. So I'll just chat a wee bit about this. So when we were still part of the EU, this law came in and it's been transposed into our law. So it's the EU Invasive Alien Regulation. And basically it's in place to protect biodiversity because, as I said in the previous slide, it's the second biggest threat to biodiversity is invasive species. It outlines a list of species. They're known as the species of union concern, and there's really strict regulations on that list. Now, initially, it was only 37 species in 2016, and then there's been regular updates to the list, and now there's 88 species on that European list. Now, that doesn't mean that all 88 species are in Northern Ireland, but it's 88 species across the whole of the EU that are of a union concern. And then it's in the regulation that it's up to the member states, so up to the European country, whether to focus on eradicating the populations or controlling them or just containing them. So coming into our law, we've got the Invasive Alien Species Order that came into force in 2019. Now it focuses on prevention and also early detection and rapid eradication of new invasions. And then obviously we've got a lot of invasive species already, so then it focuses on the management of widespread invasions, because the laws have to be practical. Ideally, we'd be eradicating everything, but that's not really possible, especially with a lot of the species. They're notoriously difficult to control. So if we can control spreading the species, that's essential. So there's 18 species on that list, 12 of which are plants and 6 are animals. And one final note, because I know that a lot of people get worried about these plants, especially Japanese knotweed, that can be on land and that kind of thing. A lot of the time, not all the species, but a lot of the species, it's illegal to plant or cause the spread of many of these plant species. So it's not necessarily illegal to have a plant on your land, but it is illegal to allow it to spread off your land or allow it to spread elsewhere. So now we get to chat about some of these wonderful plants. And to be fair to the people that brought them over in the first place, they are quite impressive plants, especially that plant there on the right-hand side, which is the Gunnera tinctoria. You can see why people would have brought that over. It is impressive to look at, but it's an absolute nightmare. So, so please, if you're on holiday, don't bring things back. So first of all, giant hogweed. This is from Central Asia. It was originally introduced in the 1800s. It is massive. The giant in its name is not an exaggeration. It's a truly huge plant. If you've seen it in the wild yourself, you'll be quite astounded by the size of it. So the leaf, you can see in that picture, it's got very deep jags to it. It's very, very big. It can be over 1 meter in size. And the underside of it is hairy, but don't be turning the leaves over to check the underside, to check that it is that plant, because this is the plant that's actually dangerous to human health, which I'll talk about in a little bit. The stems are hollow and they're ridged. So if you see a stand of giant hogweed in the winter, you'll see all these dead kind of hollow stems sticking up. That's one way to ID where there has been a stand of it in the summers, is the dead sites, because all the leaves rot back, but the stems are left behind. And when they're growing, they are green and they often have like purple blotches on them, especially near the base as they're growing up, and they've got white bristly hairs on them. They flower generally June to July time. But because of climate change, because our seasons are all a bit up the chute at the moment, that can change. So when I say generally, I mean it is quite general, because if we had a very warm spring, they might be coming into flower earlier. And as it's been so, wet and cold, they're not really up to flowering quite yet. There's ones that I've seen recently that are only just getting their buds. Flowers, again, they're huge. They can be over 50 centimeters in diameter, and they're kind of like umbrellas. And these aren't either to be mistaken with our common hogweed. Our common hogweed is like a miniature version of this. It's a lot daintier, and the leaves are more lobed than jagged. So it is easy to kind of mistake them when they're younger, but when this is in its full size, there's nothing else it could be. So the seeds are the big issue here. There's 50 to 80,000 seeds per plant. So each of those flower heads there, that'll turn brown and then become all the seeds, and they shed August to October. These seeds can last in the ground for a long time. I think it's up to about 5 years. So if you come across a stand and you've sprayed it or reported it or whatever, that's going to take a number of years to eradicate that population, just because the seeds can remain viable for a number of years afterwards. So it's something that needs to be continually monitored. They get up to 2 to 5 meters tall, so again, really big. This is a photo of ones taken from a bridge looking down in just outside of Limavady. And they start to come up in early spring around March time. It's a lot harder to ID them when they're smaller. There's a wee video later on in this talk that actually shows a small hogweed plant, so a giant hogweed plant. So you'll be able to see what they look like when they're young as well. They commonly grow along riverbanks and water sources, and also waste ground and tips. Now, a lot of things that I say in this will be repeated throughout each species, because that's where they tend to grow. The water courses act as like corridors for them to then travel down a lot of these plants. That's how they spread. So the impact, they form really dense stands and they outcompete native species. So you can see here in this picture, this is just when they're young, and you can see they're already, that's what's growing there. There'll not be very much underneath that. That was a patch that I would have controlled in a previous job with a colleague. It's around Loch Ney, and when we go back in winter, there's not, like, the soil is bare there. There's nothing else growing underneath those plants. So you can see how they outcompete our native species. And then they cause erosion in winter as well, especially when they're growing next to rivers, like I explained in the previous slide, because they die back in the winter and then there's nothing holding that bank together. And so when water comes through in the winter, it can erode. Now, the high risk to human health is the sap. So if you get any sap on you, it causes really severe burns. And then that can reburn again. It's sensitive to sunlight, so that can reburn again for a number of years. So you've just got to be really cautious if you see it, or if you suspect that is what it is, then avoid it. And also, if you've got dogs, and you're out for a walk and if you see it, try and keep them away from it as well, because if the sap gets on their nose or their paws, that obviously can cause the burning as well. And you can see here we take PPE very seriously when it comes to giant hogweed. We're covered head to foot in protective gear so that we don't get any of the sap on us. So if you do see what you think is giant hogweed, please, please, please report it. You'll need clear images for identification, but don't touch the plant to take the photos. And you'll also need the exact location of where it is, just so people can go out and verify it and then go and start to treat it. Now, I'll be going over how to report things later on in the presentation. The control, it's not for the public to do, it's for an expert to do. So please do not attempt to control this plant. One, because it is the danger to public health, but if you do it wrong, it could end up spreading further, or a patch might be missed when, you know, experts are out there controlling it. So always seek expert control for giant hogweed. So next, a bit of a friendlier plant, but just as much of an issue, is Himalayan balsam. This originated in the Himalayas, as the name suggests, and it came over to the UK in the 1800s again. The leaf is a kind of stereotypical leaf shape that like a kid would draw. It's that oval shape with kind of serrated edges, and they grow in whorls of 3 around the stem. So you can see from this picture, they're kind of coming out in a trident shape almost. The stem is hollow and it's really fleshy and it's weak. So if you even get the stem between your finger and thumb, you can generally squish it and it'll just kind of flop, because it is really quite a weak stem, and it's green and it goes down to red nearer the roots. Again, they generally flower July to October. That changes year on year, and the flower is quite attractive. It's like a pink kind of bonnet shape. Some people really like the smell of it. I really don't like it. I find it really pungent. But so like you can kind of tell when Himalayan balsam is around, because the smell is quite distinct. But it just depends on your nose whether you enjoy it or not. The seeds are hanging pods, and when they're ripe, they explode when they're touched. So in the previous slide here, you can see the seeds in this picture. The seed pods are beginning to develop there, and that's what they look like. And they've got little ridges along the seed pod that when they're touched, even with the slightest touch, they explode, and that's how the seeds can spread. These can get up to 2 meters tall as well. I've been in stands that are higher than me. And the stems can get pretty hefty, but generally they're a bit smaller. They are recognizable from May. Now, if you're familiar with the plant and you've worked with the plant for a long time, like I have, you'll be able to recognize it from when it starts to emerge in like Marchish kind of time. But they're recognizable generally from May for everyone else. And again, where can they be found? Again, it's the riverbanks. These seeds can travel down water and last in the soil for about a year and a half. So again, if you think that you've managed to eradicate a population, check it again the following year, because there'll be a seed bank. They do like damp ground, so damp woodland, it's a common place to find them, and then again, waste ground and tips. So the impact, they form, again, really dense stands, and they outcompete native species. They've got very large leaves, and they grow very close together, so they outshade the other plants and they take up their nutrients. And again, like I said, with the our insect population, they often prefer Himalayan balsam flowers to our native ones just due to the high nectar source. So they'll be pollinated over our native plants and therefore spread again further. And these really do cause erosion in winter, because when they're growing along the riverbank or wherever they are, when they die back, there's literally no root system left in the ground. And so if we've got heavy water flow or heavy rainfall, a lot of that soil can wash away, because there's literally nothing holding that bank together. If you see it, you can report it, especially if it looks like it's a new stand, so like a smaller stand of it. And again, you need the clear images and the exact location. I've not put it in capitals for reporting this as much as the other ones, just because it is quite a common invasive species, and if you'll probably spend a lot of your time reporting it if you come across it, because it's kind of everywhere. But if it's a new stand in particular, that would be definitely a good one to report. Control is very, very easy, and it can be done by you if you have landowner permission, or just take care, especially if you're next to rivers. I am not promoting you doing it in dangerous situations, but if you're going on a walk and you see some by the path, feel free to just pull it up, because the root system is so shallow that it comes up very, very easily. And then you can leave that plant there to rot on site. Don't remove it from the site, because that could potentially spread it. So this is a pile here that me and my team pulled at White Rocks car park last year. So just left to rot down there on site, and we'll be tackling it again this year. So next is our Chilean/giant rhubarb. This originates from Chile. It's an ornamental garden plant which has recently become illegal to buy and sell. So the leaf, it's massive. It can be up to 2 meters in diameter, and the shape of it looks a bit like common rhubarb, but it's not like shiny like our rhubarb. And obviously it gets much, much bigger than our rhubarb does. The stem is really, really tough, and it's green, and it's got short, hard spikes on them. And these spikes kind of come up to the underside of the stems, the leaves as well. The flower is that pink conical cone that you can see there in the picture. It's really quite big, and these flower heads, so it's the red bit is the flower head, and then they eventually turn like greeny orange, and then that's then the seed as well. So this flower head is also the seed head, and there can be 10,000 to 100,000 seeds per head, which is great because it means that it can spread even more. There's so many seeds. And the seeds don't generally have much of a dormant period either, so that can spread all year round via the seeds. But another way that this plant spreads is through rhizomes as well. So it's got really quite chunky, hairy kind of rhizomes that help it spread as well under the ground. So if you've got this big plant here, there'll be little baby plants next to it, and that'll be coming off the rhizomes. These can be up to 2 meters tall. I think that one was about 2 meters tall. That's in Cushendall. And they start to emerge again in early spring or March. If any of you follow or are on Instagram and you follow our Instagram page, I did a video of this plant emerging in Castle Rock. So you can see how small it is to how big it can get. So again, where can it be found? Coastal cliffs and waterways, roadside, wet meadows, and also close to human habitation. So if you remember from a few pictures ago, there's the one that's close to human habitation, which is in Castle Rock. So that's a population that we are currently managing. So the impact, again, it outshades our native species and it spreads really easily. And those big, thick, hairy rhizomes can cause flooding because when it's growing next to the waterways, they are really quite substantial, and they can block drainage channels and water courses and stuff, which creates flooding. So if you see it, yes, please do report it, because once we know where our population is, it means that we can start to control it, or the landowner. When I say we, it's not always the council. If it's on council land, council controls it. If it's on other land owned by other landowners, that's up to the landowner to control. So if you see it, it's better to report it than attempt to control yourself. So leave it to the experts. If it's on your own land, so say you did have it as a garden plant, now you're like, oh, I don't want that anymore. You can dig it up in its entirety, but you have to make sure there's no fragment left behind, because it can regrow from a tiny piece of rhizome left in the ground. So you have to be really sure that it's gone. And then if you are digging it up, you can leave it to rot on site in black plastic. Do not put it in your brown or black bin, because this will spread it. So if you are controlling it on your own land, do not take it off your own land. Let it rot down on site in black plastic. Or you can seek expert control. So Japanese knotweed, I'm sure you're all familiar with the name, if not what it looks like. This, again, it originates from Japan, Taiwan, or northern China, that kind of area of the world. So to ID it, the leaf is kind of like a heart or shield kind of shape, as you can see from this picture, and it grows in like a zigzag on the stem. The stems are kind of speckled reddy purple, and again, they're hollow. When it dies back in winter, you can see a lot of the brown stems just sticking up with the old leaf and flower stalks on them. It almost could look a wee bit like bamboo when it's died back. The flower is creamy and white, and it's got like dainty like little flower spikes on it. And then there are no seeds for us in the UK with Japanese knotweed, because we've only got the female plant and a sterile male plant here. So they can't actually pollinate and spread through seeds, which is good because it spreads very easily through rhizomes and it's very difficult to control. And then again, it can get really tall. This is just a young plant in this picture, but it can be 2 to 3 meters tall. I've been in very, very dense stands before where it's well over my head. So yeah, this can, again, it's a big deal. And again, this emerges in April, May kind of time, and at the moment it's really got its head above the ground and it's maturing. It's maturing significantly at the moment. Again, where can it be found? Similar to the other ones, this has got a bigger range of conditions and habitats. Again, the water sources and tips, disturbed grounds, railways, roadsides. A lot of the time you might see it growing out of a hedge, and that can be quite a significant impact, because then if a hedge gets cut and it's not known that the Japanese knotweed is in it, that can spread it, because the cuttings can be flung around the place, and then any like fragment of stem that hits the ground can potentially regrow. So that's how it can spread from being cut. So again, the dense stands outcompete the native species. Nothing is going to be growing underneath that stand there. This is one that is a particular concern to property owners, because it can grow through tarmac and concrete where there's a weakness. So it's not going to grow through something that's, you know, not got any cracks in at all. But if there's a little crack and it's present, then it can come up through that and cause a lot of issues. And it is really difficult to remove. So stands can take, you know, 5+ years to remove, and that would be a constant kind of attack on the stand of like spraying it every year for a number of years until it's gone, and then monitoring afterwards. So if you see it, yes, please report it. And then any reports will eventually get back to the landowner for them then to start controlling it. If you come across it, do not cut it. Like I said before about if it's in a hedge or whatever, it can spray out, and those fragments can grow into new plants. So yeah, please do not cut it. If you have it on your land, do not cut it. Just seek expert control. Even if you try and dig it up yourself, even if it's one single plant, the root system is significant. It can have a 7-meter spread and a 3-meter depth. So if you know, digging up is a thought of option, it needs to be a pretty big hole. So yeah, again, leave that to the expert. So just a wee note on some other invasive species that you can find around the place that I'll not go into as much detail, but information on these can be found online, which I'll be talking about in a wee bit. So Himalayan knotweed is the first picture, so top left. That's similar to Japanese knotweed in that it's very difficult to control, and it emerges in April and May. The leaf structure is like that of the Himalayan balsam, so growing in that kind of whorl of 3 around the stem, but it grows similarly to Japanese knotweed. Then we've got rhododendron, which is the middle top left. Rhododendron ponticum, it's a common garden plant. It can still be sold. It is very attractive. It's in flower at the moment, so all those big bushes of purple that you're seeing along the roadsides at the moment, that is our rhododendron. That spreads really, really well. And it's visible all year round because it's an evergreen plant. if you have these in your garden, you can help not allow them to spread by even just picking the flowers off before they go to seed, and then you've got a nice bunch of flowers on your kitchen table and you've done a bit of conservation work at the same time. And then we've got laurel, which is the top right picture. This is a really common hedging plant because it's evergreen and it's bushy and it grows really quickly, but that's also why it's an issue for if it spreads itself out into the wild. And this suckers, so this spreads through suckers as well as rhododendron. And the leaf litter of both of those plants is toxic. So if it's so even if we manage to remove a big stand, the soil underneath will have its pH level changed and the kind of structure of the soil have changed. So things won't begin to grow in its place for a while until that soil has settled out. So yeah, that's another reason why it's good to control it before it gets out of control so that things can recover a bit quicker in the wild. So the bottom left picture is salmonberry. Now it looks quite like raspberry, but it flowers and fruits a lot earlier than raspberry. And you can see in that picture there, it's got pink flowers. So yeah, that's our salmonberry. Cottage wood in Cushendall has got a lot of this, and it suckers out as well, like our raspberry plant. Middle bottom picture there is our pheasant berry. I think this is possibly still sold as a garden plant. When I have been Googling the plant for researching for information and stuff, it comes up with garden centre adverts and stuff. So I think you can probably still buy this one. It is quite attractive, but the berries are really attractive to our native birds, which then eat them. And then they can spread them because when they poo them out, that then spreads it into the wild. And that can look quite a lot like bamboo as well when it's not got its leaves. And then bamboo, I don't have a picture of it, but I think we're probably all pretty familiar with what it looks like. That spreads really quickly. Again, it forms really, really dense stands. And it's visible all year round. If you didn't know already, bamboo is a grass and it can grow like visibly quickly. Like you could sit there for a day and watch bamboo grow. That's how quickly it grows. It's impressive. And then the last one there is the bottom right picture, and that is the American skunk cabbage. That grows in damp areas and it emerges in the spring. There's not too many recordings of that in our borough at the moment. So if you do see that out and about, please report it, because it's not got big populations up here yet. So I would like to make sure that it stays that way, and we could maybe even potentially eradicate populations up here. So if you see American skunk cabbage, please report that so that can be kept on top of. So talked a lot about reporting. Now I'm going to tell you how to do it. So it's really, really important because it gives us, the landowner, a clearer picture of the issue, and it gives also the department, so DERA, it'll give them a bigger picture of what the state of invasive species is like in the country, and also then how, to tackle it. So plans can be written on how best to tackle it. Because once it's reported, the landowner can then be alerted to its presence, and then they can, start to put into action how to control these species. So even if you're unsure of what you're looking at is the plant that you think it is, it doesn't matter, just report it. Because the ways that you report it, there's verifying teams, and also if you've got good pictures, there's people that can, they'll be able to check it and they'll be able to say yes or no, this is it or it's not it. So it doesn't matter if it's not it, because then you've not missed something that is it. Okay, so don't worry about if you're not sure, always report it. So I'm gonna play this video and have a wee breather and let you stop listening to my voice for a second. This is the iRecord app. So this is available on Android and Apple. And that reports, the reports that go through this app go directly then, or eventually make it to the DERA Invasive Non-Native Species team. And then they are so DERA are the enforcing agent, and they then inform the landowner that they've got this, species on their land and that they have to then control it. So I'll let you watch this video, and this is the video that has the baby giant hogweed in it as well, so keep an eye out for that. It's a very user-friendly app as well. It's a good way to record things. And it's a good way to record things on site, like at the time, instead of having to remember to take the pictures and remember the location and stuff for when you go home. You can do this all on site whilst you're in front of the species that you want to report. So it's a good one. So there's the baby giant hogweed. You can see how different it looks when it's little. Okay, so that is the iRecord app. And then the next video is a bit less high-tech. I did a screen recording of this video, so I'll be talking over this to explain how to report via this website. So this is the CEDAR online recording website, which is the Centre for Environmental Data and Recording. That is the web page. And then this, again, these reports make it back to the DERA invasive species team, who are the enforcing agent, and then letters go out to landowners to say, you've got this, you need to control it. So this is the CEDAR homepage when you click into the website. So you can see you can record invasive species, but you can also record other species as well. So if you've got a general interest in other species, you can use this to report, say you've seen a smooth newt or something like that. So begin to fill in the boxes. So they often have a drop down to suggest what you're typing in. This has got a drop down of certain and unsure, that kind of thing. So select that. And then the abundance. So if it's a big stand, you can do, I've put in 25 plus, so it's obviously a big stand that I was reporting there. And then the date is important, because if you've seen, I don't know, maybe a plant that in the midwinter, but it's still got leaves on, it's probably, that'll help identify it as well, because Japanese knotweed isn't going to be in leaf in midwinter. So that can be a determining factor. So if the record is sensitive, that's if it's at home and you don't want that publicly visible. Okay, so I've reported a New Zealand flatworm before on my drive, and I didn't want that to be publicly viewable. So I just clicked the sensitive record. And then the bit up there was for photos. So photos are really important, because they've got verifying teams that will help to, they'll be able to look at those photos to verify the species. So now with the location, use the map to get as accurate as possible the location. So yeah, this is in Limavady, and I'm just zooming in, because the closer you get, the more accurate it is, and then the easier it'll be for a verifying team to come out to verify it and for the landowner to find it. So then it gives you the grid reference, and then you can give the site a name. And then the habitat menu, that's a drop-down menu. You can't see, you can't see it on this recording. So that's a drop-down menu. It gives you, woodland, water, grassland, urban, that kind of thing. And then it comes up with a one to make it more specific, and then just hit submit when you're happy with that. And that is how you record with CEDAR. I have created a handout that I can get Tiana to send you guys if you want, that goes through the step by step of recording to CEDAR. So let us know in the chat box if you want that handout, and I can send it through to Tierna, who can forward it on to you guys for if you're keen to record, because this is also how you can record species that aren't invasive species as well. It's a good way to be part of citizen science, which is a really important thing, because the more eyes we've got on the ground, the better reporting things. So useful resource is this website. It's invasivespeciesni.co.uk. And that's kind of like a go-to for everything. It's got NI specific information, because often if you go into like looking at invasive species, a lot of them can be like more general, so like UK wide or Ireland wide, but this is actually NI specific information, and you can select all sorts of different bits of the website to look at what you want to look at. So it's got a lot on the legislation, EU, UK and Northern Ireland. So yeah, that's really handy. And then it's also got information on the different species. So obviously this is quite a short enough talk, and I've not gone into great detail on all the species that we have. So this is a good site if you want to learn more about different species, or if you've got something that you're like, oh, I think it might be this, but I'm not sure, you can go on this website and check. It's got on how to control the species as well, some more detail on that, and also the links for those two websites. So for the CDAR and for the iRecord app, it's got links for that as well. So this is a really, really good website. So hopefully you've managed to note that down in time. And if not, then I can send a link for that again to Tierna, and she can forward it to you guys. So to conclude, the invasive non-native species or invasive alien species are plants or animals that have not evolved here. And they become invasive when they take over, because there's no natural control mechanisms and they're really suited to the new location. They are detrimental to biodiversity. They have a massive impact on the economy, and some of them can affect human health. They can be controlled. Some of them can be very difficult to control, but they can be controlled. And it's really, really, really important to report them. So you can see here again pictures. So this, the left picture is a giant hogweed plant, and that the white kind of bit at the top of the plant is the flower bud. It's about to come into flower there. So that's kind of showing the scale of height. That was my colleague, and she's about 5'5". So you can see the scale, and that's not even a fully mature plant yet. And again, we've got our balsam that's got seed pods on it, our baby Japanese knotweed, and then that was a wee poster I put up to call people to action to do a Himalayan balsam bash at Somerset Riverside Park, which I might do again this year. But just before I come out of the presentation, I do have a call to action. So if you guys have been inspired by this and you want to help, there is a balsam bash. That's what we call controlling Himalayan balsam, in case you're wondering, at the Ballycastle Mini Golf. Grace from the Causeway Coast and Glens Heritage Trust is hosting this. I'll not be there for this one. So Grace is very kindly doing it on our behalf. It's on the 11th of June in the evening at 7 p.m. and you'll be meeting outside the Shorebird Cafe in Ballycastle. You must email Grace to register though, so that she knows the numbers, because the numbers will be capped. But you can see here, this is a picture I took a few weeks ago of the balsam. It's a lot higher now, but it's a fun task. It's a fun one to do. It's a good intro into controlling invasive species and doing conservation work. So if you are available, please do sign up for that. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to come out of this slide now. So if there's any questions, I think Tierna will probably man that, and I'll obviously answer them. But yeah, thank you very much for listening, and I hope it was informative for you. So I'll just stop sharing that.